I'm Jack Knott. I'm the Dean of the Sol Price School of Public Policy at USC. And our panel is going to focus on housing, especially the demand and supply for housing, as well as policies for bringing that into balance. We're going to look at subsidies and so on. I wanted to just say a few words about that. One is, it was striking to me that even though LA is not the most expensive city in Los Angeles, if you look at the per capita income and then compare it to the cost of housing, we are. So even though housing is more expensive in San Francisco and New York than it is here, when you relate that to the per capita income of the population, we are the most expensive housing city in the country. And that obviously is one of the market conditions that contributes to the homelessness issue that we face. We also, as was mentioned, we don't have an infrastructure for housing focused on the homeless like some other cities do. Such as Salt Lake City, for example, and I think earlier it was mentioned Boston. In addition, I think it was also mentioned this morning that as a result, there's a gap of around 527,000 affordable housing units that we don't have between the supply and demand for them. We want to also look at the policies related to this, and I don't know if our panel will get into all of these, but possibly into some of them. There's a lot of issues around zoning. The ability to build new housing is affected by zoning regulations. There's also environmental and other regulations that were mentioned throughout the day that affect the availability of low income and other kinds of housing. There's, of course, in addition, the not in my backyard problem. We were listening just the other day to the mayor of Huntington Beach argue against any more affordable housing in Huntington Beach, even though the law requires a certain percentage of the housing be affordable. They were arguing that it should be reduced by about half. And so this is part of the not in my backyard phenomenon. And then we also might think, and I'm thinking of Nicole here down on the end, about some of the organizational and ways that services are provided and the interaction between policies and how those policies actually affect the people who need them. So we're going to look at, in that sense, an interaction between the private market, which produces these very high costs and tight market conditions, and the kind of policies and organizational issues that together produce this housing gap. So I'd like to now introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with Jan Perry, who was just arrived, I guess, and we're really pleased that she's joined us. She's the General Manager for the Economic and Workforce Development Department of the City of Los Angeles. She was appointed to this position in 2013 by Mayor Garcetti, and she has a deep knowledge and really strong passion for neighborhood revitalization and building sustainable communities. Next to her is Michael Alvidrez. He is the CEO for Skid Row Housing Trust. As you know, Skid Row is approximately 50 blocks just east of downtown LA. This area is also, as you know, a long-standing history as a residential neighborhood of the most vulnerable and the most in need. Margaux Helvey is next to me. She is Vice President for Development and Community Engagement at LA Family Housing. She works closely with the community of homeless families and individuals in LA. And she's responsible for fundraising, communications, and outreach. And before joining LA Family Housing, she worked at the Downtown Women's Center. And last but not least is Professor Nicole Esparza, who is also the director of our graduate programs in nonprofit management and leadership at the USC Price School of Public Policy. Her work examines homeless assistance nonprofits, and she's studied at least 26 different metropolitan areas And her current work looks at interorganizational network dynamics and how that influences the effectiveness and distribution of homelessness services. So would you please welcome our panel? So Jan, I'm going to begin with you, and we have 5 to 10 minutes for each person.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here to just share some of my experience and past and current on the issue of homelessness. As many of you may remember, I was a councilwoman from 2001 to 2013 and represented the area commonly known as Skid Row. And I had the pleasure, really the honor of working with Mike Alvidrez from Skid Row Housing Trust and Anita Nelson from SRO Housing. And Anita's over there in the room listening, and they're both very, very humble people who represent a very hard-to-reach constituency. And, you know, as a new elected official and one who was an emerging policymaker, I felt it was incumbent upon me in an era of term limits to fly, to move, to push, and to follow their lead, and to learn from Mike and to learn from Anita, learn how to fund the construction of new housing. From a policy standpoint, I could do preservation of housing, existing housing, preservation and renovation of single-room occupancy hotels. I was able to do conversions, but the real hard policy work of following the money, following the tax credits, listening to people who are actually in the business of taking hard-to-reach populations, taking people who have dual or multiple diagnoses, taking them from the street and putting them into housing, but not just putting them into housing with wraparound services at the level to which they needed support so that they could recover and that they could reclaim their lives. And so I feel that I was fortunate to be able to serve under their tutelage. And I think together, and if you look back at the numbers between the two of them, and Mike, I'm just going to throw a number out here, in downtown in South LA, we were able to build about 5,670 affordable units, and of those 5,670 affordable units, I think approximately less than 1,300, but between 1,250 and 1,300 were particularly devoted to permanent supportive housing. And we were able to work very well with the county during that time period, although initially I would say it was a bit of a struggle, but people began to change their mindset so that in every project that we did, it always had support services on site, either on the first floor or somewhere in close proximity, and then the whole concept began to morph, and that's why it's so exciting today to serve as the general manager of the Workforce Development and Economic Development Department, because now I get to work with Anita and with Mike and all of the other providers in the emergence of their social enterprises, so that now we can help their clients, people who are housed, supported, have a safety net, and now we can help them through an LA Rise grant that we got from the Rediff Foundation, $6 million over 5 years, to take the hardest to reach resident or client and begin to, and I hate all of these buzzwords, but I'm going to say it only once, upskill them, to provide them with the soft skills, the learning how financial literacy, learning the basics of how to function in society, and then begin to layer on those skills that people need now so that they got housing, they're being re-socialized, they're stabilizing, psychological and physical well-being are improving, and so now it's time to also integrate that issue of getting people prepared to go to work. But it starts with a place to live.
Jan, I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to say a little bit about the politics of why it around this issue of homelessness, especially the difficulty of why haven't we funded it? Why don't we provide the kind of infrastructure What is going on with the if you're willing to talk about that?
Well, being a Trojan, I'll be diplomatic. All right. I'm not known for being soft-spoken. But I'm just going to tell you from my viewpoint. When you see people who are living in mental illness and on the street, and there are other interests, the first people you serve, in my opinion, are the people who are there on the street. Because if you don't, they will get sick, they will get hurt, they will get worse, they will never recover. They will be exposed to respiratory illnesses, all sorts of illnesses, get hit by cars, be hurt by others who are there to prey upon them, and they'll never recover from their mental health issues. So for me, that's where it began and ended for me, and it's a highly uncomfortable thing to have to do, because when you move forward, when you move in a fashion where you're trying to basically rescue people and not waste time letting them stay out there because they will get hurt. We shouldn't live in a city where somebody dies of hypothermia. And that did happen here. I was at a vigil 2 weeks ago for an elderly man who got stabbed right by Whole Foods downtown. These things shouldn't have to happen here. Mike knows that, and Nita knows that, and they're probably, in all likelihood, avoidable. And so,
but it sounds like without a ballot initiative, the politics of the city and county are not going to provide the kind of revenue that we need for.
You have to enforce what's on the books to protect people who are out there and who are vulnerable. Let me just tell you a little quick story. As a council person, we had a team of people. We went out on a monthly basis with the Midnight Mission, the LASA outreach workers, and with LAPD, with specially trained officers in mental health issues. And I remember one woman in particular, because I was walking with the captain of Central Division. We saw this lady, and she was very ruddy from being exposed for a long time. And we said, please come in. There's a bed. There are beds. You know, we were right in front of one of the missions. We knew that they had beds that night. It's not safe for you. You're a woman. You're alone. You're out here. And we stayed and talked to her for 15 minutes. She said no. And as you know, you can't force someone to go in off the street against their will unless they're a danger to themselves or to others. So we had to walk away. Sad, 2 days later, I read the Los Angeles Times. There was her picture. She had been murdered just a few hours after we left her. Mike, you may even remember this one. She got stomped to death. And they did catch the man who did it. But, you know, it's one of those, and I think about it every single day, even now. You know, what if I'd stayed a minute longer, 5 minutes longer? What if I'd been more pushy and said, I'm not going to leave till you come in? Maybe she would have lived. And what I read in the paper, she had issues. She had a family. She had issues. And so, for me, the answer's pretty clear.
Thank you. Mike, could we turn to you next?
This works. Yes, thank you. It's so great to be here and actually hear many of the panels that preceded ours and hear so many good thoughts to come out of those panels. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. First, I've been working in Skid Row for over 25 years, which makes me both impatient and pissed off most of the time. But also very concerned about the conditions that persist in our city, which have now grown to encompass much more of the city and the county than when I started working in ending homelessness. So a little bit about our organization. We are a nonprofit, about 26 years in operation. We started out believing that if we could just rehabilitate some of these old SROs that were pretty old and decrepit and move homeless folks into them, that would solve their problem and everything would be hunky-dory, and we learned that wasn't the case. If you do not address the underlying conditions that cause the homelessness in the first place, you will not be successful in actually achieving stabilization. And so we moved from a belief of affordability and preservation of housing into what's now called supportive housing, which means that you have to bring those wraparound services to address the underlying causation of the individual's homelessness. We don't do this by ourselves. We partner with a great number of other organizations, both public and private, to bring the services to bear primarily that help address those issues: health, mental health, recovery. And we found that it actually works, and it works quite well. And the subsets of the populations that we serve include folks who are homeless with a mental illness, people who are homeless with other disabilities, high utilizers of the emergency room in the hospital, people leaving incarceration, veterans. The list goes on, and each one of those subsets has its own unique issues that have to be addressed specifically. And so one of the things that we've learned is that we don't have that capacity to do it ourselves. And I think the issue that is most important is how to collaborate with those various partners that can bring those services to bear to help us achieve the stabilization in our residents, and for some to move on to housing in the community of their choice. And so we are builders of housing. We also have a nonprofit affiliate property management company that has over 100 employees, and this is an economic development opportunity to take people who may have experienced homelessness themselves to become part of that effort through that affiliation. We recognize our role is not just to create housing, but also to help employ. I like the comments on that last session about the anchor and what you should do as an anchor entity. So we're trying to do that by employing people in the community as well. In getting ready to come down here, I began to think about what are our existing affiliations with USC. And so I began to go down the list, and it was actually much more lengthy than I had realized. We are already in partnership with the School of Social Work. We participated in a study that they conducted about transitioning into housing. That has been published. I'm glad to hear that it's been extended for a more longitudinal study. We'll see what those impacts are. We just got funding for a telehealth program that will attempt using iPads to help folks who suffer from depression and who are isolated in their rooms, to help get them the therapeutic interventions that they need and hopefully become less isolated. So this is a brand new project we're doing with School of Social Work. We collaborate with the School of Occupational Therapy. One of the issues with our population, the average age is 52. The toll taken by not having regular health or mental health services means that your body is actually closer to 60 or 70 years old. And so we have an aging population. We have an in-home care provider that's been relocated to one of our buildings to provide in-home care services to folks who are beginning to develop cognitive deficits as well as mobility issues. So hopefully they can stay in their homes and not have to go to a higher level of care, board and care or skilled nursing facility. And so what I did is I actually took a screenshot of the Price School curriculum offerings, and it's here someplace. Here it is. Master's programs in public administration, nonprofit leadership and management, public policy, urban planning, real estate development, health administration. That's everything we do. That is every single thing that we do to address homelessness. And so in the notes that they gave me that sort of tee up the conversation, they said, what do you think USC can do to advance the cause? Since you asked, this is what I think. I think there ought to be an institute. So you have all these schools, my guess is, operating relatively independently. We all get siloed, inevitably. But I do think there's an opportunity, given the extent of homelessness in our region, given that we haven't yet figured everything out. We know some things, and there's actually some pretty good stuff happening in Los Angeles. But I do think that if you can create an institute and bring all of those respective schools together, I just heard a terrific presentation from the engineering department. It's like, wow, this is terrific. So I do think there is an enormous amount of crossover between all these schools, and if there was some sort of structure set up like an institute to actually knowledge share and see how those individual sectors can actually bring the best ideas together and develop additional best practices. I think that would be tremendous value in partnering with local organizations like LA Family Housing, SRO Housing Corp. There's a number of us out there that could benefit from that kind of an association. And I think, I hope, I don't know what the timing is here, but am I out of time, or should I keep going?
Do we have?
I'm good? Okay. I have 4 minutes to go. Oh my God. Yeah, I know. This is like Christmas time. So I do think that one of the things that I think USC could bring to bear is a big voice, right? This is a big issue. We've got a lot of work to do. It's obviously affecting people all across our region, and I think if we can establish a stronger collaboration with USC and bring that big voice to bear to actually push the agenda politically, as well as studying what these economics are, I actually believe that homelessness, to some degree, I think homeless people are the canary in the coal mine. That what we're seeing with homeless people is the most visible manifestation of the lack of affordable housing that we have in our region. We've got people who, live 60, 70 miles away, and these are, the stereotypical fireman and teacher, both employed, workforce housing, but they can't afford to live in Los Angeles. We've got seniors that are going to be increasingly trying to figure out where they can live in a place that they can afford on a Social Security check. We've got low-income families all over the city and the county who are struggling, working 2 jobs. Sometimes both parents, kids don't get the adequate parental guidance they need. They don't do well in class by the 3rd grade. I mean, we heard all this information provided us to already. So I think that homelessness, yes, we do have to address it. It is the issue of the day. But I think the larger issue is that we collectively have to figure out how to provide more affordable housing for a whole variety of populations. We don't have enough, and I think the consequences are dire if we don't collectively figure out how to do that. But today we're going to focus on homelessness, and so I do think that the Institute idea, since they asked, I'll just throw that idea out there and hope there can be some conversations around that.
Well, thank you for the suggestion for USC. I'm looking, that's one of the purposes, and maybe in some ways the main purpose of this kickoff, to try to figure out how the university can play a role with all of you in addressing this major issue. Is there, when you talk about the not enough housing of different types and so on, if you had to point to 1 or 2, are there policies that affect that could make a difference? I had mentioned zoning, or I had tax policy or anything like that, that you think if you could, change, would that help? Or anything else you can point to that you think would change that situation?
Yeah, I do think, the way, so we build housing, and the way that process works is really inefficient and very time consuming. It just takes too damn long to actually, get all the financing in place and build the housing and get some person off the street. Again, I'm motivated by the fact that, as has been said before, people die every day from the exposure from being on the streets or for other causes, poor health, whatever the case may be. So this is very urgent for us. I think we feel the urgency very strongly. I do think that the entitlement process can be streamlined, but I think the most important thing for me is the mindset, that I think we're relying on existing policies, procedures, and protocols to, guide us, and I think we've got to rethink that. I think we have to, as someone said, and I agree, this is a crisis, and it's like a hurricane, Katrina or Hurricane Sandy. It is a disaster in terms of, the human toll. I think we have to get wrap our minds around, let's forget all the existing policies and protocols. How do we get there? And how do we get there quickly? And how do we do it right? And how do we be smart about it? I think that's really the policy that has to happen first in our own heads collectively in order for us to make those changes in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah, Jan.
And you asked, the original question you asked about the politics of it. One of the things I think that USC could do, and it could come from the School of Law and the School of Business, is to help figure out a way to pay for this that goes beyond the traditional approaches to chasing money wherever we can chase it, or chasing tax credits wherever we can chase it. That's part of the inefficiency that Mike talks about when we were in an uptick in the real estate market, and when we had money and we set it aside for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It was a way for, to a certain extent, for developers to come and leverage other sources of revenue to be able to build new housing or to rehab housing, but that has its peaks and its swells, and it's unreliable. And so we, maybe somebody can talk about tax incentives for people who hire people who come out of their programs. Small businesses get some kind of relief or reduction in their liability so that we have a pipeline, but we still need that net new revenue source. I don't know where it is, but certainly with the minds here at a place like USC, we should be able to come up with some options.
Our USC Center for Social Innovation did a conference last week, and one of the most powerful presentations that I heard there was about tax sharing. And I don't know if that's been discussed at all, but there have been some other cities such as Minneapolis and St. Paul that have used that in a very effective way to shift money into the issues like homelessness. So tax policy, I think, is something very important here. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Margaux, can we turn to you?
Hello. Hi, I'm Margaux Helvey. I am not Stephanie Klasky Gamer, our CEO. Unfortunately, she had an emergency come up, but she's also a Bruin, so I'm here as a USC grad. I have my MBA and MSW from USC, so I'm very happy to answer the question that has been asked of the panel, which is what can USC do to address the homelessness issue. And I just want to say that by holding this gathering and asking that question, that is a huge first step to even acknowledge that USC could and should have a role in our city and these challenges. And in fact, it's why I came to USC 10 years ago to get this degree. I wanted to be able to address issues of homelessness. That was the career path I wanted. And I wanted to be in a city with the biggest challenges, but also the most innovative solutions and the best leaders addressing them. And I think that we have a really important role here in LA, because LA is just on a larger scale of what every other metropolitan city is facing. So it's not just how to address homelessness in LA. Many of the nonprofits in LA are national models, and we're at those tables, all of us collectively helping to share these best practices. So the relationship between the service providers and the thought leaders and the research is extremely important, that we remain collaborative and have that feedback loop going. So this is a great part of that. And I'll talk a little bit about LA Family Housing, and this topic is on housing specifically. So LA Family Housing is one of the largest housing and homeless service providers in LA. We're not primarily centered in Skid Row. We started off 33 years ago with some affordable housing, mostly in South LA, to address the crisis of family homelessness at the time. And then a couple agencies merged together with a shelter in the Valley and became LA Family Housing. So in our 33 years, we've always had a mix of crisis and transitional housing, as well as permanent, supportive, and permanently affordable housing. And I think that it's really important that as a whole continuum, we have multiple housing solutions, because homelessness is a multifaceted problem, and what a chronically homeless adult is experiencing is different, as we heard, than what a youth is experiencing, and different than what a family is experiencing. And within those, everybody's having different challenges. So we do need multiple solutions, and I think it's important that in our conversations we don't look for that silver bullet. all the time. But having said that, the one common thread in all of the different solutions that we've engaged in have been focused on permanent housing, because homelessness ends when you have a home. So it's pretty much as simple as that. In our case, we do have bridge housing that is an important step to that immediate crisis point, especially for chronically homeless adults, when we are working to get them into housing. Because of all these complex policies and various solutions, we do realize that we need some temporary solutions, but always the goal is how do we look for the long-term sustainable solution for this person and in our communities. We were asked to address a couple of the challenges that we've faced. So in our recent growth, in addition to the 23 properties that we own and operate and the permanent supportive housing buildings that we develop, we are also the lead agency for the coordinated entry system in SPA 2, which is mostly the Valley. It's a very large area. It represents 1.5 million people, and sometimes you don't see the density of Skid Row, but the problems are just as real. And so one of the challenges recently we've seen is that we do have clients and families and individuals with vouchers, with subsidies for housing, but there's simply not the housing stock. Our staff, many of them coming out of USC with social work degrees, they have been spending all of their time looking on, might as well be on Craigslist looking for an apartment. You know, they're housing navigators, but we're just looking for the housing. So there are these macro issues at play. There's a 3% vacancy rate in LA. I think we all know and can experience that personally ourselves, the lack of affordable housing in LA. So that's one of the challenges we face is just the availability of housing stock. And then also with a shift, and it's been a good recognition that there's a need to move people more quickly into permanent housing rather than wait to get all these other issues addressed and then housing, because we know that that doesn't always work. But a little bit the pendulum has swung. We're actually dealing now with a lot of rental subsidies for our clients, and that has created some burden on us as an agency. We need more accountants counting, cutting the checks. We need a fleet of cars now because we're going out in the community and doing scattered site housing. And of course, the sort of chicken and egg problem for every nonprofit is staying on top of our quality assurance and measuring our outcomes. We have 60 public contracts and another 30 to 40 private grants. And you can imagine, as a research institution, you know what it costs to do research and how much time it takes and how complicated the data can be. And we're in a world of big data, and our agency is as big as any other company out there trying to compete in the marketplace. We're a $17 million operating budget. We have 160 employees, and the availability to invest in our own performance metrics, how well are we doing, and to be able to report that to our many different funders who all want to see it and hear it a different way is a burden and an area where it's not sexy to provide funding for that. And I do think that that's an area where a university can recognize the value in that and come alongside and partner. So I will take my last 2 minutes. We're getting loose here. It's the end of the day. Okay, I'm going to take my last couple minutes since I get to say what I think the role of USC can be in this. So I've already said that I think USC is doing a great job of just having a history of being in the community and combining thought leadership with on-the-ground practice. And I think to recognize that attracts students and professors and people who want to make a difference, and to recognize that role of shaping leaders. I think somebody said earlier on the health panel that how can we ensure when we move funding over here, that it's actually going to be used for what it should be used? And the answer was, it comes down to the leadership and having committed, ethical leaders. It's like what Giampieri was saying here. You know, she had a role of leadership and personally could not look at someone on the street and not do nothing. And so I think for all the kind of macro, heady, big picture policy we get into, to recognize that as professors, you are shaping students who are going to be grinding this out every day, and it's exhausting work, and it can be thankless work. But you are part of that support system, and to provide that ongoing professional development, to provide some loan forgiveness. I'm just going to put it out there. For those of us who are working in nonprofit and government, and we need the top leaders. This is the deal that we've been working on for our new campus. Is the banks who have worked with us have told us it's one of the most complicated structures they've ever had to finance. So we don't just need sort of nonprofit people, the good, soft-hearted. We need, where's the business school here, and why weren't they on the panel? Where's the law school? I'm sure that every agency is dealing with legal issues, just like every business is dealing with legal issues that distracts us from the good work that we're doing. So I'm just saying, the university can do a lot. I think in this area of policy and figuring out how we get more housing in LA, some dedicated research studies to that, so that it's not one person's opinion or the next person's opinion. There is research to back up these decisions, and then that can be put in front of the right people. So I think I'm done on my soapbox. Yeah, I finished. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I do want to emphasize that, this is just the start. This is the kickoff. So we're definitely going to have the law school and the business school and all the other schools engaged. That's the goal of this. So, Nicole?
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Esparza. I'm a professor at the Price School, a policy school here at USC. And I'll keep it shorter so we can hear more from these great comments that you guys have been saying. I want to just start off by saying, Margaux, you're absolutely right about, training. I run the nonprofit program through our Price School, and the great thing about my job is I get to teach all these great master students who are going to go on and run nonprofits or run foundations. And I always tell them, there's a special place in learning about how to become a nonprofit manager from within a policy school. And I think that's because from my perspective, when I think about how I came into homeless services and I worked in the sector for a while before I went to graduate school, was I could really see how organizations are very affected by the policies that they have to deal with, right? So in homeless services, we have policies at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And thinking about how, I'm going to talk a little bit about, how does federal policy, particularly federal funding, that's kind of my research, how does that affect homeless services? And both, because as we know, almost all of really funded grants come from the top down, getting down to the local level. So most homeless services can be funded through HUD. That's our biggest agency that funds homelessness. And so I wanted to talk really briefly about how policies, particularly funding for permanent supportive housing, kind of how that affects us at the local level. And it's interesting because I think one of the other things I wish, not just USC, but universities everywhere, I could think of maybe 10, 20 people that actually study homelessness from a policy perspective. And I think that we should think more about how can we address this. We have a lot of people who study health, a lot of people who do interventions, a lot of people that do other types of housing policy, such as Section 8, which is kind of just on our way towards homelessness. But thinking more about how does this fit, how does policy fit into homelessness? And I think our panel is doing a great job talking about that. So let me talk really briefly about what, permanent supportive housing. So as most of you know, probably in the early 2000s and the aughts, the federal government decided that they wanted to kind of move the shift from managing homelessness to ending homelessness. And most of this comes from what was happening at the local levels, innovations that were happening in Los Angeles, innovations in New York, innovations in Philadelphia, really kind of bring out the housing first model. So then by 2005, HUD realizes that very, very few of these service areas at the local level are actually using federal funds for building and improving housing, permanent supportive housing. So they make a policy that says 59% of all funds have to be spent on permanent supportive housing. So my research then decided that I was going to look over time from 2005 to current to see which localities actually did convert most of their money to permanent supportive housing, and what kind of were the barriers to actually implementing this. So in general, Los Angeles has done a pretty nice job. So in 2005, we were at 52% of the money that was given to the Los Angeles City and County was spent on permanent supportive housing. Just last year, it's now at 70% of the share is given to permanent supportive housing. And I give this in perspective to a place, say, San Diego, where my parents live, so I could say that. They gave 19% in 2005, and then now, currently, they're at 39% of building permanent supportive housing. So some of this has to do with the location. So we can think about many different things like zoning, NIMBYism, where these places can actually locate. And in Los Angeles, we're doing a good job, but of course we could do better. There's other cities that are doing better than us. So for me, one of the things that I looked at is what are some of the barriers. So what happens sometimes is when groups of organizations get together and they decide on what they're going to use their funds for, you can imagine that if one of the organizations in that network who gets to control the grant money, if they don't do permanent supportive housing, very little funds are actually going to go to permanent supportive housing. So one of the ways in which looking at how these organizations can work together is how do we get more, do we get new players coming in to develop housing? Do we get organizations that already exist to then retool to do housing? Because a lot of emergency shelters don't want to necessarily retool to build more housing. So in letting in new players, that's a great way to do it. Changing, rotating who gets to govern, who gets the money also makes a difference. And then the other part is that how does this federal policy then affect other things? So number one, we have a problem in Los Angeles that then we have emergency shelters that aren't getting that money, right? But we don't have enough housing to then put those people into housing. So you're at a kind of catch-22. So one of the things was that, well, then maybe private philanthropy and other types of donors would give to emergency shelter or make up that gap. But unfortunately, when the government or other policies come out that say this is the way to do things, then we found that philanthropy and donors also decided to give to permanent supportive housing as well. And they didn't make up that gap. So it's kind of a conundrum, and I just want to say that. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much. I think we have time for some questions. So yes, right here. Could you wait for the microphone so everyone can hear you? Thanks.
I'm going to rep for the law school here because our name was scandalized, rightly. We'll be bringing up the rear for sure and trying to contribute to this important project and discussion. Also, there was a mention made of Katrina, and I wanted to tie in my question to the Katrina point. Earlier this morning, the question was raised, how much do the demographics of the homeless population play figure in how we respond to that population. The fact that they have a black face disproportionately. And back to Katrina now, and thinking about how, and during Katrina, you had Sean Penn rowing up there 4 days in with fresh water, handing it out because FEMA couldn't get its act together. 4 days in, while people were standing on roofs in the 9th Ward, black people, asking for some kind of relief. And you compare that reaction to the reaction to 9/11, in which people just got it done. There was no bureaucratic red tape that could get in the way of just getting it done. And I'm tying that into some research I've recently been looking at having to do with our cognitive makeup, structures and processes, and the realization that the mirror neurons don't fire for people when they're observing out-group members. In-group members who are observing out-group members, say drinking a glass of water, their mirror neurons don't fire, so they can't simulate their behavior. The mirror neurons are the basic building blocks of empathy and sympathy. So there may be a lack of sympathy and empathy that comes from just knowing the population is disproportionately black. There are all kinds of other studies about helping behavior, Good Samaritan behavior, and how it's curbed when you're dealing with black victims or those who are in need of rescue who are black. So that, we saw that with the welfare queen with Reagan. You put a black face on welfare, you put a black face on crime. With Willie Horton, you put a black face on homelessness. And it seems to make us less caring and concerned. It seems to generate more indifference. How do we get around those kind of deep cognitive, problems that we have, those deep cultural, impediments and barriers to helping the homeless?
Well,
Okay.
if
Yeah,
I
Jan,
may,
go ahead.
I think Mike said, what did you say? You were pissed off, and what was the other word? Impatient. And pissed off and impatient. For those of us who spent a lot of time in Skid Row and we saw the face of homelessness every single day, and it was disproportionately African American, disproportionately male, disproportionately vets, people suffering from mental illness, people aging on the streets, and unprotected. And, well, for me, and I don't know, Mike's pissed off for a lot of reasons too, but I felt that they were considered to be expendable. And in many times, see, now he opened the door, and I was trying to be polite. But, while people theorize and strategize and intellectualize and are somewhat disengaged and somewhat removed, and you will find people who feel that they're doing good when they roll down to Skid Row and they open their trunk and they give people sandwiches or, whatever. That's not a long-term solution, and in fact actually encourages people to stay on the street, rendering them to a loss that at some point becomes irretrievable. And so I'm hopeful that we talk openly here in a way that will maybe shock people into understanding why we're pissed off, and help us with all of your intellectual capacity, all of your connections, everything you've got to take us to another level that we haven't even experienced before, because everybody's working hard, LA Family Housing, everybody, SRO, Skid Row Housing Trust, and yet it's still not enough, and there's some floor that has fallen out. Because when you look and you go through Skid Row and you see that most of the people are African American, then you know that in terms of the calibrations that we've made, there is a major gap in the logic somewhere that doesn't drive people. People are sympathetic, but there is not a sense of urgency. It could be because it doesn't look like Katrina, or it doesn't look like a 9/11. And it's a subtle, no, it's actually not subtle. It's not subtle at all. But it's deadening, and it's relentless, and it's deafening, and it's there every single minute of every day and every night. And perhaps when you see that all the time, if you're not alert or aware, you begin to think that that's normal, because it's not normal. You come downtown from somewhere else, and you see people who are almost like zombies, left behind. That's not normal.
Good. Yes, there's a question in the back here.
Hello, I'm Peter Carnival. I'm a professor in the business school here, so I thought I would.
Hey, all right. Law school
I'm
business.
so sorry. Everybody.
We got their attention.
Should have been
Great
up
to
here.
see some of my colleagues here as well. I also live downtown, and in Councilman Huizar's district, District 14, which is also where Skid Row is, and some people have observed that the governance of Los Angeles is a bit dysfunctional, and in fact, Councilman Huizar has proposed that that we should have a homeless czar to run the show and to give the authority to a single person or a single structure within the governance of the city. And I'm curious what you think about that, especially Jan Perry.
Well, why would you abdicate your power? This is a major university. You have major assets, major resources. And, you know, in my opinion, and I've been in government service for public service for a very long time, if you can't get satisfaction in one area, you go to another area. You go to philanthropy, you go to the private sector, you go to the business sector, you go to the not-for-profit sector. You keep moving. I think designating someone as a homeless czar, we all need to be courageous. We all need to be brave. We all need to take action. One person through which all that information flows isn't going to solve this problem. That may make some people feel better, that they know that they have one person that they can say, well, let's go see the homeless czar. I don't know who that person is. Maybe it's Mike. Maybe Mike would like the job. But this is going, yeah, you got a job. If each one of us could stop theorizing about this and take what we have that we bring to the table and put it into action, we can move this. We don't need one person to move it for us. That's what I think.
Okay. Do we have one last question? Yes, over here.
Yes, please. Steve Renahan with Shelter Partnership. In the interest of giving USC assignments, you've persuaded us all that permanent supportive housing is the appropriate intervention for chronically homeless people who are currently on the streets, but there's been a lot of talk about the lack of affordable housing and how that contributes to the inflow into homelessness. We learned at lunch that we should be looking upstream and deal with the inflow into homelessness. So what USC could do is two things. First, an honest calculation of how many of those 527,000 units we're short in LA County government-funded capital programs can produce, all the trust funds and the tax credit programs. And when that calculation yields the answer less than 1% per year of what we need, you could then move on to what policies does LA City, for example, have to change if it wants to be serious about producing its fair share of the 527,000 affordable units. Sounds like Huntington Beach is too hard, but what does LA City need to do if it wants to get real about producing enough affordable housing units so we stem the inflow into homelessness?
Good. So, who would like to address that? Can we?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, I said yes.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Oh, yes. All right. Anybody else want to?
He's absolutely right. He just laid out a roadmap for us all. So let's figure out what the next step is so we can develop an advocacy strategy that has many layers to it that we can actually implement at the local level, at the county level, state level, at the federal level. And again, you know, maybe be strategic about the money that we have for certain programs once we figure out where the gaps are, and then look for net new revenue with law and business to help us get there.
You know, Jan, Mike mentioned this notion of some kind of institute or at least some entity that would bring resources together at USC. It sounds, you know, when you look at the range of policies that need to be changed, Is there that kind of mechanism in the city county, or do we need something that brings these things together, or do we already have that?
We just went through that with the city and the county in developing their homeless plan.
And you feel that's where we need to be with that? Just
Well, no,
I mean,
we don't have the money to pay for it. We have a 1 to 2 years out, and the county has set aside a significant, what is it, 100 million or more than that?
It's
Plus, and
138.
then they've already established their affordable housing trust fund. The mayor, in his budget proposal, has designated or earmarked money for the next fiscal year for homeless housing and services. But there is still missing that long-term projected out strategy. There is discussion about maybe using a linkage fee. There's discussion about going to put something on the ballot. But again, those are not sure hits.
But you feel that the structure and the governance arrangements are sufficient for that? It's basically a funding problem.
It's a funding problem, but it was a way to pool many different voices into one document.
Can I also respond, because I think it's a great question. And again, I think that's where we have to change our mindset. We have to think about those larger issues, because we're not going to get there alone with the city and the county plan. We obviously need some long-term strategies about, in the way we think about it. Housing is basic infrastructure. We don't think about it that way enough. And it's also an investment in our own people. And I think we need to reframe the way we think about the need for the creation of more affordable housing. The other thing is, housing has always been a good economic driver to create jobs. It always has been, and it should be. And I think that we can, increase the economic activity and provide an essential infrastructure need that we all have. And I think we have to think more deliberately and think smarter about how we get there.
Yeah, can I just say on that? I think, we've a little bit forgotten in all of our excitement around social entrepreneurship that affordable housing was one of the first earned income models. I mean, this is a sustainable solution. Our clients do pay a portion of their rent, but we're recognizing that, that this is a more cost-effective solution than doing nothing. And so I think that we know the solutions, they can be sustainable, but they need that investment up front.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in that question, partly because of the gentleman here asking about the perceptions of this and whether there's a political strategy that's needed. I was referring to the professor from social work who was talking about the misperceptions about youth and thinking, he gave the stereotypes about the views of youth, and it's a parallel kind of attitude, I think, right? And would you think that would require a coordinated communications or political, if you're going to change the culture around that or the perception, is that something that you think should be part of the policy?
Well, I think going back to the gentleman's question, I think if you can think about homelessness as the failure of other systems. So the educational system, the foster care system, the criminal justice system, the mental health system, the health system, and you can look to see who's in those systems most predominantly or who fall out of those systems most predominantly, and they're minority populations. And so that's why we have such great health disparities among minority populations. So I think we've got to rethink the feeder systems into homelessness. We're not going to end it unless we do something about changing those feeder systems. But I think all of this is doable. I think, to some degree, I think homelessness has caused many of us to become paralyzed by the magnitude of the problem. But I don't look at it that way. I see many opportunities to reframe our thinking about how we can actually come up with solutions. That used to be what Los Angeles was known for. It's sort of been, a public policy pace setter for California and the rest of the country. And I think, we need to figure out how to regain that belief in the fact that we can change things for the better. And I think when we do, I think we'll all feel a lot better about being Los Angelinos or, representatives of SC or our respective organizations. So I think there's tremendous opportunity and optimism that lies for us to discover that path.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I'd like to be honest and have an authentic conversation about why we are where we are and how we move forward. and what we bring to bear to be able to take that in another direction. But I think the thing that misses the point for so many people is there are good people who are working hard, but it's not personal. And there's no personal, emotional depth of a connection that you can actually lose someone forever. I mean, I witnessed it myself. Mm-hmm. If I ever needed a better lesson than that 5 more minutes with that woman, mm-hmm. maybe I could have convinced her to come in, and maybe she would have lived instead of been murdered. That's a horrible lesson to learn. And to understand that could happen to any one of us less than 5 minutes away from here, probably 3 minutes away from here. And so why shouldn't we all have that sense of urgency? And to the gentleman from the B school, that's why I say that, one czar isn't going to make this change. We have to make it change.
Yeah, I was going to add to my roster of people at this table the School of Communications.
I was trying to.
Yeah, because
Ernie's a good friend, so I was trying to get that in there.
Everything these days is the story we're telling, and let's get the film school in here. I mean, this is PR, this is media. Are these stories being covered? Are these stories being told? And we have so many new platforms to do that. I oversee our fundraising and community engagement. So it can take the shape of a story in writing, it can take the shape of a story in film, or when we engage people directly in our agency, if they come wanting to drop off sandwiches, we're going to tell them so much more and help them see the deeper picture. And I know USC is good about that, about getting people involved in a sort of grassroots, on the ground way, and that is a place to start. We have to meet everybody where they're at, not just our clients, but other potential advocates who aren't even an advocate yet, and haven't heard those stories. So I do think that's, and USC has a huge voice in getting that message out. So it's a great opportunity.
Well, good. One of the things I have really appreciated this panel and the questions is getting to kind of the purpose of why we're here is what role can the university play, and I think there's been some creative suggestions around that. Would you please join me in thanking the panel?